I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Forgotten Oscar Films. If you don't know, which you probably won't, this is the 4th episode of this series, a new series that I'm going to be planning on doing each and every week, every Friday for the upcoming months, up until the 2020, Oscar race. I'm your host, Connor Old, and what we do every single week is I look at a film that was nominated for Best Picture, and I talk about why it hasn't sort of stayed in the popular culture. I'm choosing films that either I haven't heard of, or I've heard only a little bit about, and either did win Best Picture and sort of were nominated, maybe won a couple of awards, and understand, were they forgotten for a reason? Were they just poor films and misguided at the time? Or are there really some great movies in here that, because maybe there's adult dramas that don't have certain particular genre trappings, that they don't see as relevant today? And that's sort of my quest. I start with the year 1988. We're working backwards. We're here with the year 1985 now, and the film we're going to be looking at is Kiss of the Spider Woman. So just at the beginning, we get some history and some of the other nominees to give you sort of that Oscars background, but then later on we're going to do a little bit of film analysis while also answering the question as to why is this a film that hasn't been remembered, and try to explore that a bit. But in terms of the history, the 5 nominees at the time were, of course, Kiss of the Spider Woman. Then you had Prizzi's Honor. This was a film done by John Huston, who is sort of a classic director, writer. He did Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and many other films, and this is sort of a standout sort of Jack Nicholson performance. Anjelica Huston won the Best Supporting Actress award. So I think I want to cover John Huston eventually and say A Masters of Controlled Chaos. So I avoid this one. Plus, I thought that he was a well-recognized enough director that it didn't meet my criteria. I've heard about it enough. The other film was Out of Africa, which won Best Picture, which surprisingly was actually maybe going to be my pick. I did do it just because it's done by Sidney Pollack, and it does have some cachet because it won Best Picture. It's going to be hard for me to actually choose a Best Picture just because it has cachet. Maybe, 1985, the Best Picture should have gone to something else, a more recognizable film, say something like Back to the Future. But I think that, because it won Best Picture, has been in the conversation, and I at least heard about it, and it was something that people had actually told me to watch before. So it's not something that I've never heard of. I really want to go for films in this series that are just for kind of definitely more obscure, and really sometimes in some of these movies I've never even heard the names of. I didn't know they were not nominated. I've never heard of them. At least Out of Africa, I heard that it was a movie that existed, and a great Meryl Streep performance, directed by Sidney Pollack, a acclaimed director of something like Tootsie, for example. So he has his own credit. Then the next one was The Color Purple. Of course, this has Steven Spielberg directing it, Oprah Winfrey, Whoopi Goldberg, huge movie stars. Big budget director. I've already seen the movie, so I did want to cover it here again. And then another movie I saw, which I already covered on an old, Witness from Peter Weir. Of course, I accompanied that with my Peter Weir Masters of Controlled Chaos series. Check that out. He's a fascinating director. So I didn't want to cover that again. And then pretty much ended up with Kiss of the Spider Woman, something that I knew very little about, starring 2 actors who haven't really stayed in sort of the star lexicon the way someone like Jack Nicholson or Meryl Streep or Oprah Winfrey have in terms of their sort of notoriety, despite them being super notorious at the time. And let's just transition over into that, because really I've been dodging this William Hurt bullet for quite a bit these few episodes. He has an amazing run in the 80s in terms of Oscar nominations, but in terms of star and cultural dominance and just sort of a critical acclaim, most definitely. So I have a list here. I'm just going to read it off just so I get everything correct. So in 1988, he had Accidental Tourist, which he made, which was nominated for Best Picture. In 86, he had Children of a Lesser God, which was nominated, in 87, excuse me. So 88, Accidental Tourist. 87, he had Broadcast News, which was nominated for Best Picture. 86, he had Children of a Lesser God, which was nominated for Best Picture. 85, he had this movie, which was nominated for Best Picture. And then in 83 was Big Chill, which was nominated for Best Picture. So out of those 6 years, in 6 years he was in a Best Picture nominated film in a time when there was only 5 Best Picture nominees. 5 out of those 6 years, 3 years in a row for this. Next year, Children of a Lesser God, and then the year after for Broadcast News, was nominated for a Best Lead Actor, not a supporting role, Best Lead. 3 years in a row winning for this, of course. And he's really had huge success afterwards because, not afterwards, excuse me, throughout the 80s, but before all these wars, because in 1980 he had Altered States, and then in 83 he had Big Chill, but and then '84 was Body Heat. So he was a huge influencer and a really acclaimed actor that they just seemed to want to reward him year after year after year. Yet, for me, what's my relationship as a 19-year-old kid to William Hurt? Well, it's that of, he's the general from the Marvel films. Of course, I've heard of some of his other films as I'm starting to explore more about film, but he's not someone, like I said, like a Jack Nicholson who has stayed in sort of the cultural lexicon and has these great performances and seen as this really great actor. Going back at it, he really had this dominant era of the 80s of movies I've heard of, but even still not movies that got a lot of critical acclaim, a lot of award attention at the time, but still haven't held up. The Accidental Tourist, I never heard of. Lawrence Kasdan is a filmmaker that hasn't really stood around a bit. The Big Chill was sort of known. Children of Lesser God I've never heard of. Kiss of a Spy Woman I barely heard of. Body Heat, sort of a good sort of director cult classic, but Altered State's very much an 80s movie. Those are even still are sort of cult, almost genre movies like an Altered State's. So it was really interesting to go back and see a couple of William Hurt's movies, and I think I'm going to explore more of this filmography because I want to learn obviously more about film history just in general. And William Hurt, especially in the 80s, was a huge part of it. So, I tried to do some research, why hasn't he sort of stuck around? Why didn't he do it in the 90s? Essentially, it came down to some set problems in terms of substance abuse problems, potentially sort of things going on in his personal life. He was sort of a cold, remote person on set, supposedly. But also, sort of from my parsing around, I think it's just his commitment, his little commitment to genre films. I mean, we've talked about this in the 80s. The people who remember the 80s and the movies that are sort of remembered in the 80s aren't your Out of Africas, or even, say, your Amadeuses, which are these great sort of big, sweeping dramas, which are well made. They're more of the sort of traditional commercial movies. Your Back to the Futures, your Goonies. These are sort of the movies that, Raiders of the Lost Ark. These are the sort of four-tier blockbuster movies that everyone enjoyed, that were good. They're good movies, E.T. But those are the movies that people remember and talk about. And like I said before, it has something to do with sort of the age of critics nowadays that influence me, and a multitude of factors really. But I also think that it has to do with genre, and I think something like Back to the Future, one of the best sci-fi movies of all time. E.T., one of the best sci-fi movies of all time. Raiders of the Lost Ark, one of the best adventure films of all time. They fit into these certain categories. So when you look up genres and whatnot, you're looking at action, you're looking at action adventure, you're looking at sci-fi, you're looking at romance, you're looking at horror. The Shining, one of the best horror movies of all time. They make these less. They came out in the 80s, but they're particularly genre movies, and those are the movies that were making money at the time in the 80s. There were movies like Three Men and a Baby, these sort of comedies, but those aren't really movies that were remembered. Sort of the comedies and the dramas that sort of dealt with 80s times. Sometimes they feel a little bit dated, but sometimes they're just forgotten. It's hard to have a drama like that be remembered because the drama genre is not really a genre, it's just a huge part of filmmaking. So I think in a lot of ways that's a reason why William Hurt sort of hasn't stuck around. Another reason could be his sort of parts went to different people. The sort of traditional leading man role has a sort of a unique aspect to him. I think maybe Nicolas Cage or Michael Douglas at the time. This was the transition era in 1987 for them. They started to take those roles, but they also started to take more genre roles. I mean, Nicolas Cage, so many action movies. Michael Douglas did, thrillers, and he did, erotic thrillers, and he did sort of that route as well, and has stayed around in prevalence because he's known maybe as a genre guy, and that led to him getting, Hank Pym and Ant-Man and the Wasp, and sort of William Hurt's left to being the general. So there could be a multitude of factors, but I really think it has to do with his lack of genre, his sort of unique picks at the time, and less sort of big standout movies. I'm sure he probably could have been Batman at the time, if that sort of, continued on and they chose, because it was in 89 and 92, Batman Returns. I mean, I could have seen him been Batman, that could have changed his career, but he's sort of choosing to odd movies like The Doctor, for example. It was a Disney film that was well received, but just a strange pick overall, I think. But before we sort of go down that rabbit hole, let's quickly transition into my thoughts, and it just revolves around some pillars, particularly the performances performances and the dialogue. This is a story structure that's not wholly unique. We see this many times. Again, sort of men or people from two different backgrounds come together with different sort of viewpoints or views on the world or attitudes, and they come together and they have a mutual respect for one another. Most recently with Green Book, and this has sort of been touted as this traditional storytelling structure that is maybe boring at this time, but I think what it is there's a sort of a building base of structure, but then you can tell and explore certain themes within that script. The script is done by Leonard Schrader, directed by Hector Babino, who actually doing some research, didn't speak a whole lot of English, so William Hurt, most of his performance was done through an assistant director, which is kind of interesting. But really, you can, like I said, you can have that sort of structure, but then you can do so much within it because you can explore certain themes and sort of societal issues and whatnot. And I think this film does it very well, particularly with gender and sort of political elements and fantasy versus reality in a unique way. And there's really great dialogue here. They're always talking. It's fast-paced. It's entertaining for that reason. And in a lot of ways, they explore certain topics and themes that you wouldn't be able to if the film, say, with less dialogue, especially in this one place. So, because the film is mostly set in a jail cell, I thought, they did a great job of not making it feel claustrophobic, keeping it sort of open and cutting to sort of outside shots of the jail as well to keep things open, to keep things less claustrophobic, because you can make a jail cell feel claustrophobic, but I don't think that was the intent of the filmmakers. William Hurt ended up winning an Oscar for this, and I think well deserved, because he has a really amazing performance. I thought I was expecting it. He's playing a gay man who's very feminine versus sort of this Raul Julia, who is a masculine man. And maybe if Raul Julia was someone like Jack Nicholson, we'd be talking about this film more today. But Raul Julia unfortunately passed away with us too soon. He's mostly known for Gomez Addams of the Addams Family. So that's unfortunate. He sort of hasn't built a huge legacy for himself where it's like, oh, let's go see all of Raul Julia's films, and then maybe William Hurt gets swept up with that. So you have sort of these two lead actors who hadn't stayed enough in the cultural presence today, unfortunately. But Raul Julia, of course, plays more of a masculine, traditional masculine, and political advocate and activist. And I think William Hurt could definitely have been super over the top with the feminine aspect and the gay aspect, but I thought he was actually surprisingly toned down. I think he could have been very sort of flamboyant in that sort of stereotypical gay sort of way, but he wasn't. I thought that he was actually toes the line in a lot of great ways, where he's still a human being. He's not sort of just a performer which puts on all this makeup or puts up on all this different feminine clothes or whatnot. There's definitely, he's still a man. He's not a transgender woman, for example. He's still a man, but he's gay, so he has sort of a feminine aspect, and tries to touch into some of those feminine aspects of his soul and of his personality. And he talks about that with Raul Julia, and they explore sort of these sort of gendered stereotypes or stereotypical sort of viewpoints of men and women that have sort of existed in popular American culture, or even you could say Canadian culture, and challenging those, which was a unique thing. Another part that was introduced I wasn't expecting was the idea of fantasy versus reality, the sort of constant idea of the movie going through with the real sort of political activism and dying for your life. What does that have to do? Almost relates to the mission from last week, sort of the idea of martyrdom. So that was interesting. Although there were some choices as the story went on that kept it interesting and kept me interested in it, but also that were really misguided and ultimately kind of hurt my enjoyment of the film near the end. I enjoy the performances, I enjoy the dialogue, but it's also a movie that I think is sort of hard to maybe get yourself back into. And let's transition now over into why this hasn't held up. We constantly talk about almost every single week, like, it's this huge historical drama which is long and has a unique sort of topic. Why would we sort of subject ourselves to the mission aspect? Why do you subject yourself to a 2-hour gruesome little dialogue religious epic? Sometimes, for a lot of people, when movies stay in our particular context, it's Ferris Bueller's Day Off, it's Back to the Future, it's Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's Pretty Woman. Why? Because these movies are incredibly rewatchable, and I think sometimes we place too much emphasis on rewatchability. Schindler's List is a great movie, but some people think it's a great movie. I'm not a huge fan, but some people say, oh, but I'm never going to watch it again, and therefore it's not as good as a Steven Spielberg movie, for example. And I think that sometimes, there's some movies that you watch once and that's all you need to watch. Requiem for a Dream is a great example. I'm never going to watch that again. But that's an incredible and amazing journey. In the film itself, I saw it once, and that's all I need to see because it's brilliant and it's an amazing film. And I think I should still hold it in a high regard, despite the lack of me wanting to go back and rewatch it. I just think that sometimes our ability to rewatch it, and the adult drama is a less rewatchable kind of a movie. So I think that sort of has pigeonholed it over the years. Like I said, Raul Julia and William Hurt, two big stars that have sort of. They're not big stars today. Of course, Raul Julia unfortunately passed away, but William Hurt, like I said before. And I think this is a sort of a traditional Oscar movie where a lot of times they want to reward the performances and they don't care about the movie itself. They gave it to Rami Malek for Bohemian Rhapsody in an okay movie. Same thing with Meryl Streep for Iron Lady. They like great performances. They don't care about the movie so much. And the Oscars will definitely sort of reward those kinds of films and give it to, maybe an editing, an actor, and a picture kind of thing, like Bohemian Rhapsody did. So you never know with Honestly. That's the typical sort of Oscar candidate. I'd put that in. It has stayed in cultural lexicon a bit with, musical and it's based on a book. So you don't want to discount that just yet. But of the films, I definitely think we should talk about Kiss of a Spider Woman more for these great performances. And I'd love to sort of explore more of William Hurt and Raul Julia's performances because they're both really fantastic in this movie. That's about it, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Comment below. Let me know what your sort of favorite movie from 1985 is. It was kind of a weak year, but I'm interested in this year. There's some unique picks. That's about it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. And until next time, stay tuned.